Hello there, and welcome to Il Salotto Sessions. I'm Sara Seravalli, an Italian event organizer with a profound enthusiasm for design and architecture, bringing over 15 years of experience from my work across showrooms in Milan, London, and Paris. Fueled by a passion for connecting people in the design world, I founded Design Pop-Up in 2014, a specification-focused event that has since traveled throughout the UK and in Ireland. Today I'm expanding my vision with Il Salotto, a vibrant space, both physical and virtual, dedicated to inspiring meaningful conversations and fostering connection within the design community. I hope you enjoy my chats. Good morning and welcome to this new episode of Il Salotto Session. This morning I'm here with Vanessa Norwood. She's a built environment expert based down in Brighton, south of England, to be very specific. So we are talking from two different sides of the country. Good morning, Vanessa.
Good morning. Nice to be here with you.
How are you doing?
I'm very well, thank you. Yes, as you said, I'm in Brighton. So if you hear the seagulls outside, they're very noisy this morning. They're a constant soundtrack for us in Brighton.
Oh, the wind is whistling so much. The storm this weekend has been horrendous, so we're very windy this morning.
Oh, yes, it has been. The weather's been quite wild out there.
Vanessa, talk us through your profile. You define yourself as the materials lover. How did you manage to fall in love with materials, and what's your favorite material?
Favorite material. Well, at the moment, it would have to be stone, obviously, because I'm working with the Stone Collective, and through their expertise, I've been learning so much about stone. So how I started, I have been curating exhibitions for about 20 years now, which is a very long time, and have curated and commissioned probably hundreds of exhibitions. And I went from the Architectural Association, which was a very well-known school of architecture, where we had a very broad remit. So we were allowed to explore all kinds of themes linked to the world of architecture. And then I went from the Architectural Association literally around the corner to the Building Centre. And the Building Centre, there's a great connection as well, which makes it sound like I really haven't had a very expansive career. But the Building Centre was started at the Architectural Association in the early 1930s as a material library. And it was started there by this incredible man called Frank Yerbury, who was the secretary of the AA school, and he loved materials. He was incredible. He was very supportive of women in the industry. He was a photographer. He was the first person to publish Le Corbusier's photographs in the UK. So he started a materials library, which started under the staircase at the AA, where students would come along and to learn firsthand from looking at materials. So he formed the Building Centre, where I then became creative director. And I really took inspiration from Frank Yerbury and thought, what would he do if he was around and he was running the Building Centre now? And I think he would have been looking at sustainability and how materials that we build with need to more and more change the way we make the built environment. So I set up a group of exhibitions on materials, and we worked with some really brilliant architects like Dorika Marsh-Morgan. We did forest fabrication, looking at timber, material cultures. We did an exhibition called Homegrown, looking at straw and hemp and bio-based materials. And I did the New Stone Age with the holy trinity of Armin Taha from Group Work, a brilliant architect, Steve Webb from Webb Yates, and Pierre Bidot from the Stonemasonry Company. And we looked at stone. And actually that exhibition was a really important moment in a lot of other people wanting to learn about stone. It's sustainable, versatile, and beautiful. So it was perfect timing. So yes, since then I've been working with the Stone Collective, and I would have to vote for stone as my favourite material, because if I didn't, I think they wouldn't be pleased with me.
This gentleman.
To your question.
No, that's okay. That's okay. This is what we're here for, to get as much information as we can. So this Frank Yerbury managed to inspire you and influence your work, even though it was, he founded the Building Centre in 1931. So it was like 2-3 generations ago. It's quite incredible how these people can still influence and inspire us after such a long time.
Yes, well, I think he was passionate about architecture. He traveled around leading photography groups to look at places that weren't very well visited, and his photographs are very beautiful. So, sort of learning about him and his passion for looking around at the world around us, I found very inspiring. So, yes, I think it's always good to look back and learn lessons from the past and the people in the past. And I think the brilliant thing about the AA as well, that there were lots of really incredible women students that had gone through the school system there. So that place is a great place to learn. So yes, applying his passion to a modern day building centre seemed a very sensible way to move forwards. And actually materials. So when I started, and I worked with three very clever young women at the building centre, so they also were very enthusiastic, and together we sort of did lots of research. So Matilde, Harriet, and Jenny, big shout out to them. Jenny was a keen potter, is still, and she instigated an exhibition on ceramics and architecture. So it really came from our sort of collective love of materials. And I think materials weren't really being looked at then. There were some really good
Mm-hmm.
people doing good work, but there wasn't a place to celebrate materials. And that there still isn't. I mean, I still think there should be a British HQ of materials so we can go and actually look and touch. The beautiful thing about doing the homegrown exhibition with material cultures is the straw smelt incredible, and we get people coming in to touch the exhibit, which you were allowed to do. It was a huge straw wall panel, and people would come in and stroke the architecture. And someone and I sort of coined the phrase strokeable architecture as we sat there looking at everyone coming in and actually physically running their hands down the materials. And we were sort of saying, wouldn't that be incredible if architecture was all strokeable? So yes,
Yeah.
I'm very interested in materials. And I just think the power of picking the right material from the beginning of a project can have a huge impact on the carbon cost of that project. And it's something we need to be doing more and more.
So talking about sustainability, obviously I've just read an article that you wrote for the architectures, and we can talk about them later on because obviously we got the Glasgow connection that unifies us. There is this new phenomenon now that we try to recycle materials, which is quite interesting, and also it was about time. I would add that we just don't dump everything away, but we actually reuse and recycle. And this is an article you wrote for the architecture website, and you mentioned the very, very much typical of Brighton, the new bangarouche.
Bangarouche, what a brilliant word. Yes,
It's,
exactly.
it's, I wasn't sure I was pronouncing rightly, but
That's
it's
perfect.
got such a lovely sound to it.
It's such a good word. You want to just keep repeating it. Yes,
Yeah.
Bungaroos. I mean, reuse of material isn't a new thing. So, working with the Stone Collective and one particular member, Pay Stone Restoration, I've started learning a lot more about the practice of spolia, which the Romans were doing 2,000 years ago, where stone would be reused. So, buildings were unpicked and reconfigured as a new building. So, it's been around a long time. It's just we are rediscovering the reuse of building materials, and that idea of using materials that can be well reused, unlike a lot of things like concrete, which you can't effectively reuse. So I love that there's a whole generation of brilliant people looking at how to reuse materials, and lots of places in Europe are sort of ahead of the game. I think we're catching up here. So yes, new Bungarouche. So I live in a Bungarouche house in Brighton, and
Okay.
Bungarouche is this sort of medley of materials, which is sort of broken bricks, stones, pebbles, sand, bit of horsehair, all held in place with a lime mortar. It causes builders lots of consternation because it's really hard to drill into. You either hit flint or sort of soft sand, and it's hard to put shelves up. But Brighton has stood the test of time. All those very beautiful Regency crescents that we have were built in Bungarouche, not in bricks and not in concrete, obviously. So there's a new generation of very talented architects like Local Work Studio and Mary Duggan, and I was keen to shine a light on what they were doing with materials, because they're using materials in a way that is not only sustainable, it's incredibly beautiful. And working with architectures is such a brilliant opportunity to present these stories of people doing really great stuff.
I was listening to you, and as a vision came into my mind. How your career started, and I think there's been a few defining moments in my youth that pushed me towards this incredible passion for architecture and design. And one of them was a school trip. It was last year of high school, and we went to Barcelona, and they took us to see the Mies van der Rohe pavilion at the Montjuic, and it's just blown me away. And I was not. No, yes, it was 5 days in Barcelona as a school trip. It was incredible. Between the architecture and everything was stunning, but the Mies van der Rohe pavilion just took my breath away, and I remember that emotion I felt in there still nowadays. And as you know, there is this beautiful green marble that he used for the walls in the outside area, and and then, as you say, marble luckily is one of those materials that we can actually reuse and recycle and turn into something else. Thank goodness for that, because it's just stunning. So we talked about the Bangarouche in Brighton. And as we discussed previously, I would like you to come to Glasgow next March for our event. And we would like to organize a discussion about Scottish materials. Obviously, the first Scottish material comes into my mind is the red sandstone.
Yes, absolutely.
Because it's everywhere. But it's not just that. If I look at the castle in Inverary, I think that's green granite. So actually, Scotland has got such a big heritage, and stone, which is obviously what you're working on, specialized on just now.
Yes. So one of the other stone collective members is Hutton Stone, and they're based in the Scottish borders, and they make a very beautiful. Well, they're starting to make a brick from the red sandstone. So there's a Darney sandstone brick, and they're just so beautiful to look at, and you just think, wow, that's low carbon and it's a local material, and it seems like a no-brainer that we should all be using local materials much more. And I really have noticed a huge shift over the last couple of years in architects. I think the intention was always there and wanting to do it, but now there's a lot more knowledge out there about how you can actually use local materials. I think it would be great if there was sort of a legislation enabled a lot more of these sort of local suppliers to get their materials out there. I still think there's work to be done. I mean, the concrete industry has sort of huge lobbying power, and we've just become so used to, in the built environment, the sort of construction industry, all the people that work around it, it's quite risk averse, and there are obvious reasons for that, but it really needs to shift. So I think the beauty of understanding local materials now is the fact that you don't have to transport them for miles, saving on a carbon cost. And I think I'm very optimistic about the change that's happening and the sort of knowledge. I'm in no way an expert, but I find it so fascinating. And I've been lucky enough to sort of work with and talk to people that really know their stuff and know their materials. And I guess that's why you and I are aligned. It's sort of giving space for brilliant people to come along and share knowledge and make connections. And that's the beauty of what you're doing in Glasgow with your design pop-up. It's an exchange of ideas, and that really pushes the conversation
It is.
forward.
Yeah. Trying to inspire one another and trying to share the knowledge so we can all improve and get to the next stage. On this point, I think history is giving us a hand here. With the war in Ukraine that hopefully is going to finish soon, but all the cost of the steel and all those materials gone skyrocketed over the last 3-4 years. So hopefully that's going to push even further in looking at locally. What can we source locally instead of getting the steel from Ukraine?
Yes.
Which is going to be a shame for Ukraine in the long term, but at least it gives us an opportunity to work with what's around us?
It's so important. And I think that's where sort of legislation needs to step in as well to support the sort of local industry and to make sure that it's viable for people to be mindfully quarrying or making materials. I think those kind of businesses need support to make sure that we are moving forwards. Because I think without them, without sustainable businesses, it's very hard for this shift to happen. So I think,
Yeah.
yes, it's definitely the conversation is gathering momentum, and I think lots of architects now are looking at the idea of sourcing within a local perimeter of where they're building. And I think that's going to be a powerful discussion coming forwards. And I think then legislation will hopefully step in to make sure that there are rules around the provenance of your materials and trying to build from locally sourced materials.
So locally sourced and sustainable. Do you think there is any other trends that are emerging in terms of what type of material or colors or what type of stone or things like that?
I think stone, I think using the right material in the right place is something that I would like to really see happening. So you would use timber in a particular sort of building scenario with stone. You could then look at the sort of context. You could look at reusing the materials as you unpick a building, and that's definitely happening with retrofitting. People are being very lovingly mindful towards the building they inherit rather than demolition, which there's sort of a move away from demolition. I think the conversation is definitely happening, but the practice needs to be more widespread. And that is educating all of the constituent parts of who has to come together for the built environment to function. And that's the kind of QSs, so cost consultants, its contractors are really important. So sort of joining up the conversation. And I'm sure the will is there. It's just making sure that the knowledge and understanding is there so that the money makes sense, the provenance makes sense, the architectural will, I think, is there. So yes, it's exciting sort of being part of those conversations. I think there's still big stumbling blocks. Obviously, we're still not building carefully with sort of the proper respect always to people and planet. I think there's work to be done, and I think an honest conversation is needed in the sort of truth. There's a lot of greenwashing that still goes on, but yes, on the whole, I feel hopeful. So I think, yes, looking at sort of current trends, I think stone obviously is gaining momentum. Shout out, as always, to the Stone Collective for pushing that conversation forward. Timber, there's some really wonderful, I was at the Wood Awards last week, some very gorgeous building happening in timber. My longtime collaborators, DRMM, won award for Work Stack, which is a very beautiful CLT workspace. So moving away from sort of metal tins that people used to sort of manufacture into a beautiful CLT building. So I think there are people that are really pushing the boundaries forward of what you can do with materials. Yes, I think land reusing materials is big, and that there being a sort of common marketplace, or there's something that the Belgians are doing brilliantly. Rota have been doing it there, where materials are saved and reused, resold. So I think, yes, reuse, as the Romans were doing 2,000 years ago, is a big conversation.
Well, the Romans knew one thing or two about architecture, so we definitely need to look back, same as the Greek and the other populations before us. So totally look at the back and learn from the history. Uh-huh.
Yes, they probably weren't the fairest
What?
bosses, but they were. Yeah, they had good technical capabilities.
Yeah, and a lot of geniuses in their population. Listen, you've mentioned a few incredibly interesting projects that you've done in the past. What's for you now? What are you working on? Anything worthwhile coming to see or being part of?
Well, you mentioned Architectures, your neighbours in Glasgow. So I
Yeah.
started working with their founder, Ryan Canning, on growing the business in a meaningful way. And we were talking about how he actually started Architectures through a love of materials, and there wasn't a materials library that had a good enough selection of materials for CAD drawings. So he started his own business, very young business, very inclusive. Everyone that works there seems very clued up about what they're doing. And so together, Ryan and I came up with the idea of stories where we could do a deeper dive into materials. It seemed like a natural progression for their business to actually be sharing stories. So that's where Stories was born. And I think it's such a lovely, it's creating not only a resource for the people that are using the platform, but it's really growing the network and sort of growing ideas about material stories. So I'm working with them, and that's the joy. And I do, so now I've sort of pivoted to consultancy work. So I'm actually using, as a curator, you get to hone your storytelling and your message, and then you're sharing that and you're bringing people together around a kind of common cause, which is to build sustainably. So I'm now working with practices as a consultant to help them clarify their message and to share it more widely. So yes, I'm working in a way to make them more sustainable as businesses and to sort of give them the confidence in what they're doing brilliantly. I mean, it's a joy for me because I just get to work with really clever, knowledgeable people. I'm also working with cultural organisations, which is something I've done for a very long time. So people like the V&A and World Monuments Fund, and working on cultural projects that also share stories around our built environment and what we all face because of the climate crisis. So I'm so lucky, and I'm getting to work with a range of really brilliant people doing good things. When I started my consultancy business nearly 2 years ago now, I didn't have a business plan. I did it very quickly, and I just thought now is the time. I didn't have a business plan. I still don't. I probably wouldn't know what you need to put in one, but I just had my mantra was good things with good people. And I really stand
Yep.
by it, and it's worked. I'm managing to get some really great things going with really brilliant people. So yes, that sounds like I'm being too extreme with my superlatives, but it's true. It's something I'm proud of.
You should be proud of. I'm a big believer that you work with people that you share passions with, and then you can collaborate and work together to create something bigger and better. It's not just about me, me, me. It's about how can we come together and
Exactly.
help each other and inspire one another. When I was looking for a name for this new project, Il Salotto, I looked at the competition, I looked at the market, and I thought that the word material is overused and abused.
Mm,
There is so many other organizations out there, companies that use the word material something. Um, so I try to stay away from that. And I'm quite impressed that Architectures has done the same. Even though it's a material library,
yes.
they focused their name on actually the textures. So
Yes.
again, we are going back to the touching, which I love touching materials too.
Yes.
Um, so how do we give meaning back to the word of material? Sometimes there's these words that they're so much used that they lose their meaning, like
Yes.
sustainability or luxury, or everything is luxury in Scotland, but luxury accommodation, luxury this, luxury that. But then in reality, there is no luxury whatsoever. How do we give back the real meaning to the word material and bring it back to is so important to look at.
Yes, that's such a good point. And I'm not sure I've entirely got an answer to it. I think the problem that happens in sort of the built environment and architecture is there is a lot of sort of misunderstanding about things like sustainability and materials, actually, and maybe just being very brutally honest about what's going on around the world with extraction and the way that we are actually sort of at the moment taking materials and transporting them half the way around the world. They've come from places that aren't extracting materials carefully, like a lot of the bricks that are imported into the country are the people working there are working in terrible conditions, actually. And I think there needs to be more of a spotlight on the truth around materials. So maybe then we'll stop being so fluffy with our language when we start looking at at the sort of horrible state of extractive practices on people and planet around the world. So I think maybe a big dose of honesty and sort of correcting some of the falsehoods around sort of materials so that we understand more fully the importance of picking the right material or being truly sustainable. So I think a sort of, yes, truth and lives is something that we talk about, and it's something that's come up with, I talk about it with Pierre Bidot of the Stonemasonry Company and Stone Collective, because people quite often say, oh, quarries are bad, but actually a well-managed quarry or a well-managed forest can really give something back to the people that work there, and then afterwards to nature. I mean, a lot of the work I did with TD UK, so Timber Development UK, we did lots of work on, when I was at the building centre, on well-managed forests. And a forest that is well-managed is not a monoculture of trees. It has high biodiversity, and actually the animals that live in that forest flourish far more than they do outside of it. So I think being really brutally honest about material sustainability, work practice. There's a brilliant book I've just read by Ed Conway called Material World, and he talks about different materials, and one of them is copper. And in Chile, there is a mine so deep that were you to throw the Burj Khalifa into it, it would disappear. So I think we don't really think about materials in general. We don't think about our phones and how they were made. We don't think about the fact that in our laptops and washing machines, we have built-in obsolescence. There's so many conversations that we need to be having. And actually, you asked me about my love of materials. And I just think, actually, I get the same feeling when I go into shops that sell bits of plastic for under a fiver. I get slightly panicky. I don't actually go into those shops very often, but I get a sense of panic that it's just, we're creating stuff for landfill with all these cheap plastic objects in shops that specialize in things for under a fiver, plastic toys, or things that are going to last a week or two. I get that same feeling with the way that we're building, and it's one of sort of panic. And I think we need to be, as human beings, we need to be really honest with ourselves about what we're doing. We're consuming too much, and we're not treating materials in the right way. So I think, yes,
and we should refocus on quality. Quality rather than,
and not creating for landfill. And I think that's what we're doing in general, and it makes me feel quite panicky. So maybe that's the position that I'm coming at materials from. Maybe it's one of panic and not of love.
Well, maybe they go hand in hand together.
Yes.
If you weren't panicking, you wouldn't put so much passion in trying to change things.
Yes. No, we need to change what we're doing. We need to change our view of the way we build and the way we consume.
Vanessa, thank you very much for this. You are officially invited. Well, you were already officially invited, but this is publicly invited. Come and join us at Design Pop-Up Glasgow next March 2025 at the new home Il Salotto. I'm looking forward to meeting you in person, and thank you for this chat and the other chat we had on the phone a couple of weeks ago. I really loved it.
Brilliant. As you said, good people, when they come together, good things can happen. So I think we're both in agreement on that.
Thank you very much for listening Il Salotto Sessions. If you enjoyed the chat, please make sure you share with your friends, as well as follow our podcast on Spotify and Apple Podcast. For more information on what we do, please visit ilsalotto.design and designpopup.com. You can also find us on Instagram _designpopup and Il Salotto Glasgow, as well as LinkedIn. Should you have any feedback, questions, or suggestions, please do get in touch at hello@ilsalotto.design. We would love to hear from you. Thank you very much.